Hello, and
Hey,
welcome to another episode of.
the Super Data Brothers Super Show.
That's right. I am Ryan,
And I am Eric.
and we are real life brothers who work
It's
in
true.
the data and analytics industry. And we have got a good one for you today.
We sure do.
Yeah. So if you're watching this is not a live broadcast. I know
Mm-hmm.
we normally do this one live, but we are on vacation in Kenya right now, and so we pre-recorded a little bit of stuff to keep you plugged in and give you
Yep.
all that Super Data Brothers goodness while we're out. And so today we are talking to the founders and organizers of the Modern Data Stack Fest, MDS
Mm-hmm.
Fest, which is coming
MDS
up.
Fest.
Yeah, it's coming up August 21st through 25th, and you can check it out at mdsfest.com. There's like a mountain of awesome talks that are going to be going on during this. And so we wanted to have them on to talk about it, the state of the modern data stack, and
Yep.
hopefully get you hyped up for MDS Fest and get you registered so you can get some of that MDS goodness. All right. So any last words before we bring them on, Eric?
No, I think that's about it. While we're in Kenya, we'll either have some pre-recorded stuff like this, or we might be trying to do some live from Kenya, but we'll see how that pans out.
We're
But
going to try to go live from Kenya, but we'll see how it works.
hard to know how feasible that will be ahead of time, but we'll try.
Yeah, I think in Nairobi it's doable, but like in Mombasa or Kisumu,
yeah, probably not.
A little shakier. So anyway, all right, so let's go ahead and let's bring our guests on and talk about the modern data stack. Lindsay, David, and Taylor, welcome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Great to have you.
It's awesome to have you here. So we're gonna dive deep into MDS Fest and what it is and why you've organized it and that sort of thing. But before we do that, maybe if you could each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what it is you do and how it is you got here.
I can start, I guess. Taylor, I'm head of product and data at Count. How I got here, I'm not sure exactly. I'm based out of London, and Ryan and I have worked together in the past and just kind of keep in touch and good friends. So that's maybe how I got here.
Yep. Oh, cool. Thanks, Taylor. Well, it's nice to talk to you again, Taylor. For those of you in the audience who don't know, Taylor and I used to work together at Count, and that's how we know one another. David, how about you?
Thanks. So I've been in the data space for a while, like as a practitioner leading data teams, and then most recently I've been founder and I've co-founder at Delphi Labs with Michael Irvin, and we're building like an AI conversational interface for data using semantic layers. Been blogging a bit as well on davidsj.substack.com. So that's kind of like how I came to be in the data space and to be involved with this conference.
Great. Thanks, David. And Lindsay?
Yeah, and very happy to be joining David and Taylor organizing the conference. As David, similar to David, I've been in the data space for a while as a practitioner, leading data teams, standing up data teams at startups, and having all the fun things that come with a modern data stack and learning a lot along the way. More recently joined Sakota as head of data. So joined the data vendor side and been really enjoying getting a bit more involved in solving data people's problems instead of just having them. So that's been fun. Just with the modern data stack, we can get into where that came from, but yeah, very excited to be working with David and Taylor on this.
Cool. Awesome. So why don't we start off with just what is MDS Fest and where did this idea come from?
Yeah, Lindsay, do you want to? Yeah,
sure, yeah, maybe I can jump in on that one. Yeah, so the idea, I guess we have to give a shout out to DBT and Coalesce. A lot of folks this year submitted talks to Coalesce. I think there was upwards of 200 people who submitted talks. And many people, unfortunately, you can't have 200 talks at a conference. It's just not possible. So I think a lot of people were unfortunately not selected to speak this year, but a lot of great speakers. Myself, I was one of them. So I was a little bit disappointed to receive a decline for this year. I did speak at the conference last year, And so I got my decline, and I was kind of like, oh, that sucks, I guess, well, that there probably will be really great content this year. But then I started to see it was actually happening to many other folks. So there was quite a lot of buzz along data Twitter and on LinkedIn and a couple other places, and started to see some really well-known people in the community being declined as well. And so was thinking, is there a way that we can kind of harness all of this great content that people were going to prepare and talk about and still bring this to the community in a way? So I don't think that I definitely didn't have this idea in a vacuum, because when Taylor and I got on a call to talk about content partnering, we found that we actually had the same idea. And so we kind of decided to go in on this together. And then David joined us along the way as well. So I think lots of people were thinking about doing this. I think maybe we were just the ones maybe crazy enough to plan a conference virtually. Yeah, I don't know, Taylor, David, if you have anything to add that I missed.
I think that's a good summary. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we saw some other people around the place kind of jokingly say, why don't we make a conference with all the rejected talks? And then we actually did it.
This is like the Coalesce Underground kind of, right?
Yeah,
these are the panels Coalesce didn't want you to see.
Yeah, I think Coalesce Rejects was our original name for the conference, and we decided to soften that a little bit.
yeah, maybe.
I think wise marketing decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how many? It's taken place like over the course of a whole week. So I mean, how many presentations do you have at this point?
We have just over 50 right now.
Oh.
And I think there's still a few kind of in the final works, so it'll be a little bit more than that. So yeah, it's going to be pretty full. It's running across all different time zones. We have people from kind of Europe all the way to Pacific coast of the US. And so we'll be running from very, very early in the morning Pacific coast to very late. It's pretty much any time of day you want to tune in, you'll find something for you, which is pretty exciting.
That's awesome. And what kind of, what sort of topics do you have? I mean, I would imagine it kind of spans the gamut of, different parts of the data stack and topics that people might want to cover. But, are there any particular standouts or ones that you'd like to highlight?
I think there's some really great panels that I might leave to Lindsay to talk about, because she's kind of organizing a couple that are really exciting. But the topics themselves, because it's kind of the origins of it being around Coalesce, a lot of them will be pretty much what Coalesce talks about, so a lot of DBT content. But I think one of the things I've noticed that I'm really excited about is it's less kind of technical DBT, how to do this. We still have some of those, but a lot of it's around how to get your team to buy in when you're starting with DBT, or kind of the softer elements of it that I think are really nuanced, and where you'd really benefit from hearing how someone else approached it and what worked and what didn't work. So there's so many though. I don't know if David and Lindsay, if you guys have other ones you wanted to shout out.
Yeah, there's literally, I'm looking at the list right now, and there's so many good ones. Like, I'm looking forward to your one, Taylor. Like that, I always enjoy your talks. Too many. Abby's speaking as well, and his talks are always pretty great. There's just too many.
Yeah.
I'm very excited by all the content that's going to come out from it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'll have a lot of legs. So one of the things that kind of stands out in terms of topics for me is this like kind of piece around optimizing workflows. And so I think it is there's tools involved in that, but it is just kind of showing, I think we're getting to this like postmodern phase of the modern data stack where we're kind of looking back at it and saying like, okay, it's great, we've come so far, but there's also all these problems that kind of crop up with moving so quickly and having all these new tools join the space. So I think there's a lot of introspective talks happening where people are sort of taking a step back and looking at, do we have the right process in place? Like, what can we do to optimize? So probably a lot of really great advice from folks on that. And as Taylor said, a lot of good soft skills. So things about like data culture, communication skills, which you don't often see as much at conferences. So excited for those ones. And then there is a panel that I'm hoping to work on, which is really around something. I think David, you and I were talking about this in the DBT Slack community as well, and then I think a bit on LinkedIn. But I went to Snowflake Summit recently, and as a woman at that conference, I was looking around and I was seeing a lot of men, because there are a lot of founders who are males of data companies, and so I was kind of feeling like, where are all the women founders of data companies? And so I want to do a panel to try and ask that question and figure out how can we get some more representation of underrepresented groups in general at that data founder level. And so hopefully that panel will have some interesting discussion and maybe some answers of how we can get a bit more representation.
That's actually that's a really interesting point. And I went to Coalesce last year, and as someone who's kind of been in the industry for 13 years now, one of the things I really appreciated about Coalesce and like the modern data stack and the scene that's grown up around it in DBT is the diversity. Like, when I started my career in what maybe you would call like the pre-modern or the prehistoric data stack, Informatica plus an Oracle data warehouse appliance running in the basement plus business objects or Cognos, right? Like that was what was new and cool when I started. And you'd go to like an IBM conference and it was 100% white dudes.
Yeah.
And
old white dudes. Okay.
Old white dudes. Yeah. And like at the DBT conference, it was very different. It's a different vibe and a different scene. And I think, so that's, I think, really promising. And the issue you're talking about in particular, having more female founders, like I think having more women involved at all will hopefully help with that. I'd imagine that your panel and presentation will say, well, there's additional steps that need to be taken, right? Especially when it comes to venture funding and that sort of thing. But I mean, I would just say, as someone who's been in this space for a while, that this is an area where I'm at least hopeful that things are improving.
Yeah. And I think, David, you had a good point that there's probably a bit of lag happening, right? It's like the data industry for a long time was male dominated. And so as we're getting more representation in this industry in general, there's obviously going to be a bit of lag until we get women to that level. But yeah, I'm hoping that maybe we can try to figure out, how could we accelerate that? Is there a way to go about that might help us speed things up?
Right. Yeah. I mean, please just wait is probably not the most satisfying answer, right?
It's not a very progressive message right there.
No. I mean, that's not the message we want to be sending to people. No, it sounds really cool. And I really appreciate too, like, Taylor, you mentioned the focus on that you have a lot of presentations on what we would traditionally call soft skills. And, they may be soft skills, but these are actually hard things to learn and master, I think, for data people in particular, if you've spent a long time or maybe even your whole career focused on, building pipelines and setting up solving the technical problems, there has been it feels like this vibe shift in like the last half a year or a year towards, thinking about the business value and the end consumer of the analytics, and like, are we really building what they need? Are we having the intended impact? And maybe this realization that like solving the technical problems is of course a prerequisite for getting anything done, right? But that like the value that we're maybe failing to deliver is not because we're not technically adept enough, but it's the softer skills, the business focused things. And I'm just curious, any of the three of you, like what are you seeing in that world, the soft skills, and are you also feeling this kind of vibe shift that I am?
Yeah, definitely. Like if you think about the first iterations of the modern data stack, I always felt like they were just helping us get past these like very painful technical problems which completely blocked us from doing anything in data in the past. And therefore, like a lot of data people didn't have the time invested in developing those like soft skills because they just didn't get the chance to use them because they were so busy solving technical problems. Whereas now, like the modern data stack solves a lot of technical problems for you. And now you can think about, well, you've got the headspace and you've got the time to think about, well, how do I focus more on actually getting value from data for people, whether that's, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, selling data, monetizing your data, all of these things now are things that people are focusing more on than they used to before. And you see this in the evolution of tooling as well. Like, things like high touch and sensors didn't exist when we started in the modern data stack, right? Because that wasn't the focus. We weren't focusing on making money from data, whereas now it's, being seen as an essential thing. And the way that we serve data to stakeholders, that's also really evolving. And the way we've moved from here's your BI tool, that's your only way to get data from us. We don't, to having a nuanced way to serve many different use cases of different complexity and urgency. And I can see that evolution happening. That's kind of like what I've been writing about in my blog and the couple of posts that I called, the modern data stack is dead, long live the modern data stack.
Yeah, those were good posts, by the way. I like your blog very much. So Taylor or Lindsay, any thoughts on that?
I think the one thing, I completely agree. And I think on a kind of macro scale that I'm seeing when I'm speaking to people is the language around this is really different now. Like people really seem to acknowledge the cost of not doing this correctly. So, they say things like, oh, it's really tempting for me to go perfect this dashboard, but I need to remember that I shouldn't go do that until I know what I need to build, or I should prototype it first. Or there's kind of that inherent understanding that if you don't change how you work and you just keep working the same way, it's really going to hurt you and you're going to end up doing way more work than you need to in the first place. So I'm not sure why that shifted. Maybe we did need to get, to a certain place technically, and we now acknowledge that cost, but it definitely has shifted in the last year or so, I would say.
Yeah, I would I would hypothesize, I guess, that the economic conditions that we're in now are different than they were. And that a lot of companies are now being very serious about how they're spending their money. Even just a few years ago, that was totally opposite in the tech space, right? So it was like money was everywhere and things were basically free. Everything was focused on, growth and just adding more users to your product and things like that. And now I think data teams are facing the what exactly do you do here question, or how much value are you bringing? And it's a hard question to answer. And I think it goes back a lot of times to a lack of data strategy in a lot of places. So I at the company I was at previously, we had built out a really, really large self-serve analytics function. And it was great. Everyone was using it and we were getting feature requests. We had a backlog as long as the day is long. And it was you were never going to get through all these requests. But when you really take a step back and kind of ask, what is the value that you're driving at the company? It was not a very easy question to answer. And so we kind of realized, we have to take a step back and sit with our leadership team and actually figure out what is data at this company? What value does it bring? How can we build, objectives around that as a data team, and then kind of refocus ourselves a little bit. And then that sort of empowers you to start saying no to things that are low value. Because as soon as you start giving things to your stakeholders, they're just going to keep asking for more. So I think it was a bit of a mindset shift that needed to happen, at least in the team I was on previously.
Yeah. No,
for me, it feels like it's going back to normal in a way, right? Because I started my career at the start of the last recession. And so everything was really tight. You didn't get budget for anything. You had to make a business case for everything that you were going to do, including hiring and spending on stuff. And it just makes, which is logical to me. But we have gone away from that in recent years, and probably to a bad level in some places.
I think it's healthy pressure. I think it really it forces you to take a step back and make sure that you're doing the right things, and that you're not just building a system that's just you got models everywhere and tools everywhere and nothing's governed, and the cost is scaling. It's kind of a good pressure to have for data teams to kind of learn that skill set of, especially people who have joined during the modern data stack era when everything was on the up. It's we don't really have the discipline to sort of work within a box of here's how much money you have to spend.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, it's funny, David. That's my exact experience too. I remember these days. But if you were someone who kind of started their data career in the last 5 or 7 years, this probably feels like a very shocking and sudden reversal. And so it's just very, obviously these things go in waves. 5 years from now, we may be back in another boom time where you're not worrying about it as much, and there's some cool new tooling that has its own scene around it, and they're just building stuff willy-nilly. Nobody's asking to justify it. But
we'll be back to 0% interest rate or something like that, instead of the current what, 5.5.
Thanks, Jerome Powell. Yeah.
That's the topic. That's the real topic of all of this conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerome Powell.
So I'm curious, the three of you, like, so there's been this vibe shift, and there's this new focus on value or cost justification or that sort of thing. Now, the other thing that's happened that is very different than anything I've experienced before, I think, is what's happened since October when OpenAI released GPT 3.5, and suddenly, if you were really tuned into what was going on in the AI and LLM scene, you probably weren't surprised. But like the rest of us were really, really surprised by suddenly the capability of that approach to AI. And so one thing I'd like to talk to people about, I'm really curious what the three of you have to think, is like, it's just overall, now that we've seen these capabilities, what impact do we think that's going to have on the modern data stack? And maybe just as kind of a starting point, data analysts in particular, right? You see this prediction sometimes, kind of a wild prediction of, data analysts are going to go away. They're going to be completely replaced by a chat bot. And I don't want to bias the conversation, but I'm personally a little skeptical of that. But this kind of maybe starting from there, the data analyst experience, and we can take it in whatever direction. But like, what impact do you foresee AI having on this? And David, maybe we start with you.
Okay. Yeah. So I do hear a lot of things like, that people will be replaced and things like that. And I think there's this like lump of labor fallacy going on, where just because we can do 10 times more than we used to, there'll be 10 times less of us working. No, they'll just ask us to do 100 times as much stuff. That's what will happen. And that's what's always happened when productivity is increased. So there's that. But then if you also just think about the workload, the work types, I definitely do believe some types of work analysts do will be massively automated. And obviously, I've bet on that by founding Delphi. But I don't see it being pervasive. So if you think about some of the lower level work that analysts do, and actually that they really don't want to do for very long, where they're kind of acting as a human semantic layer, where someone just comes in up to their desk or Slacks them and says, hey, what's this? And, it's a very simple request or data pull. This is typically what people being called, like, being treated as a data monkey, right? That kind of work, I think, will go or be massively automated to the point where it will just require a bit of supervision. And that's kind of like exactly what I'm trying to build. But if you think about that being, that's a lot of work that data teams do today, but it's also usually not the most valuable things that they're doing with their time. And I think what happens is that this frees analysts up from that role, which is unsatisfying, why many analysts just go off and do something else. They become product managers, become analytics engineers, become software engineers. It frees them up to do some of the deeper pieces of work that they always wanted to do, to be that consultative voice in their business, to help their business's strategy. Because once a business it's like a hierarchy of needs. Once a business has their basics done, that's when they start asking for more and deeper things. And that's actually, I think, a more joyful place for analysts to be, in all honesty. And where they're showing more value there, I think people will want more. And so I don't see us having fewer analysts. They'll just be doing different things.
Yeah, just to jump on that, I agree with you, David. In a lot of ways, I think it's just going to change the type of work that we're focused on as data people, and more around how do you help machines understand the data. So rather than like spending all of our time cleaning the data or answering questions about the data itself, it's like putting more time and investing time in the contextual information, like metadata that sits on top of that. So rather than it sitting in our heads, it's like, let's codify that and put that in a place that, an AI model can then lean on that and actually make like correct interpretations of it. At Sakota, we're working on this as well. Like we have an AI portion of our tool, and what we see is the answers that you get and the quality of the answers that you get is totally reliant on how high quality the metadata is that sits on top of your data stack data. And so if you don't, it's basically now the job of the data team will shift to, I think that is maintaining and making sure that that is really rich. And so it's probably going to be a bit of a framework shift in where you focus as a data team.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think my take is pretty similar to David's. Because the same way we see it count as well. There are two things I've heard recently I think help me like think about AI or simplify how I think about it. So one is thinking about AI gives everyone access to a team. So that's like the analogy of stakeholders now have access to a team of analysts that they didn't have before. And the other is that AI can help us be more human in a way. So I think I like that for the analyst perspective, that they get to do the work that they are great at doing, like solving complex problems. And again, back to that question of how do you add value to the business? So that's the stuff that is really value add. And, how do you actually fix your churn problem? Like that's really complex, and that kind of stuff I think is where analysts can now spend a lot of their time doing that stuff, and hopefully enjoying it a lot more. I think we all know analysts isn't exactly the most beloved job in our industry. So I'm actually really excited to see that maybe shift a bit, and get like a resurgence of that being something desirable again in a way I think it quite hasn't had that same shine as I think it should.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I was a data analyst for many years, and I feel like you never heard a data analyst called the sexiest job in the world. It's like data engineers, data scientists, analytics engineers all got that title. The data analyst never got that title, and I feel like sometimes they're delivering the most value, but you don't really see that rewarded in the same way. Yeah,
it's the hardest job. I feel like in so many respects. Like it's just stuff.
And maybe it's their decade coming up, right? Hopefully, but like, I see the economics really changing as well, because the part of the reason why data teams haven't seen valuable, I think, is because they spent this time doing that lower value work. And what will happen now is that with AI and being deployed correctly, you'll see asking a human analyst to do that kind of low level work is very inefficient, like in terms of like operational expenditure. And so people will be encouraged not to do that because it's expensive, and it's just never gonna make a profit to do that. Whereas when you ask an analyst to do strategic work, the economics completely flip, because those pieces of work dictate strategic shifts in the business, which are often like multi-million-dollar or even billion-dollar risks that a business is taking. And then spending the time, which actually isn't that big a deal because it's like a quarterly planning cycle or something like that, and even paying like a very senior analyst to do a very thorough job, even that is a rounding error in the overall cost of implementing the strategy. And it just makes complete sense there to use a very, very good human to do that. Whereas on the other side, using a human to do low-level data pools does not make sense. It's not profitable.
Yeah, and I mean I really agree with the three of you, and I think I am very hopeful, because I sometimes wonder, okay, if I were a data analyst right now, like how would I feel? Would I be hopeful or would I be scared? And I might be a little scared, but I really do think that so much of what data analysts are often asked to do, like the low value ad hoc stuff, the like, okay, I see that we have this money data quarterly, but I can't find it monthly. Can you produce a monthly data set, or even I don't like when I go way back into my career, I spent a lot of time doing like, I don't like this as a line chart. Can I see a bar chart? And and it'd be like, okay, well, that's going to go into the queue, and I'll get to it in 6 months, right? So much of that, I think, like that's just like so obvious that that's going to be replaced, and into that vacuum, I hope is what is going to step this type of stuff that you're talking about, the stuff where it makes a lot of sense to pay for a human to be really thoughtful and do a very thorough job coming up with an analysis and trying to come to inform a strategic decision, $1 million or $1 billion bet that the company's making. That's I'm very hopeful that that's what we're heading towards. So for those of you who are just joining us right now, we've got Taylor, David, and Lindsay. They're the organizers of the Modern Data Stack Fest, which is coming up August 21st through 25th. So next week, for those of you who are watching this, it'll be next week. This is a pre-recorded show, of course. So normally you get all your questions into the chat and we ask them to the guest live. Of course, if you're typing in the chat right now and wondering why we're not responding, that's why.
Yeah.
So be sure to check out the website. It's mdsfest.com to register. There's going to be a ton of awesome presentations all about the modern data stack and the types of things that you see us talking about here today. So one thing I wanted to go ahead, Eric.
Say, so it's about the MDS Fest. So this is this a free conference or a pre-conference?
Yeah,
okay,
completely
cool.
free.
And it's going to be like live streamed. Like, how are you going to distribute it? Like live streaming it on like YouTube or LinkedIn or through the website itself, or?
Yeah, so folks will be able to register through the website, and then the live streams will be available both on LinkedIn and YouTube. So you can make your choice of which platform you want to be on. It's actually, we're using the same streaming platform that you guys are using. So
yes.
It's StreamYard. It's the easiest one. It's good.
It is. It's very easy.
Best.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to, the very first time I ever had like a guest on a show and they wanted to share my screen, I tried to do I can't even remember what all we did. Like we logged into a Zoom and then I shared the screen through Zoom, but then we were live streaming through OBS and it was just a total nightmare, right? This is so much better. That's a free plug. StreamYard. If you'd like to sponsor the show, reach out.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So one thing kind of a timely topic that maybe we could cover is just your thoughts. The modern data stack as a whole. We've been talking about how it was dedicated towards solving a set of technical problems that really were not solvable. And if you talk to like crusty old analytics or BI people, they might argue with that and say, no, it was solvable. I was solving this problem using Informatica Power Center back in 2006, right? And they were, but it was taking them like 6 months to solve the problem in a way that, DBT enables us to solve much, much more quickly. So we've kind of, we've reached a point where the modern data stack is not, it's not quite the new kid on the block, right? It's been around for a while. It's established. It's starting to move into enterprise use cases, and much bigger companies are starting to use parts of the modern data stack tooling. And of course, we just had the ThoughtSpot acquiring Mode, which if you go back 2 weeks, we had Ben Stansel on the show talking about that. So check out the archives on YouTube if you're curious, his thoughts on the Mode acquisition. But excuse me, I'm curious that, where do you all kind of, what is your assessment of the modern data stack at this point, and where do you think it goes from here? Do you see kind of a wave of acquisitions coming, or like just kind of put on your prognosticator hat, look into the crystal ball, and like where do you think we go from here with the modern data stack? Taylor.
Go on, Taylor. Sorry.
No pressure.
I'll give you my full prediction. I think it's kind of similar to what we were discussing earlier in terms of how our values are shifting. And so I see a big change in a lot of the modern data stack to date has been just for the data team. And there's not really been, you can say about reverse ETL and things like that. I think, David, what you're building is starting to branch out into, okay, well, we've done all this technical work now. We've built up this great stack. We have really reliable data. But what do we do with it, and how do we translate that into business value? And I think there's so much in that space we need to discover and do so much better at. And I think, obviously, from like product hat, I think most of the products we use are not made for anyone except for us. Like the interfaces are really hard to get into. They're very technical. It's impossible for someone who doesn't know as much as we do about data to try to interact with it in this space. So I think there'll be a big shift out of our little bubble and into the rest of the business. And I'm really excited for that, because I think we've set up these really amazing and powerful stacks that we have, and with the semantic layer and everything coming in, there's so much we can now do there that we couldn't even think about doing. So I think we're going to see a lot of companies trying to solve that and get into that space in really creative ways. Yeah, I guess I'm excited for it. Obviously, that's what we're trying to build ourselves, but yeah. I don't know if you guys see something different.
I do think, like, when I think Ryan asked about like consolidation,
Yeah.
and I think there will be. And actually, the mode one wasn't like the one I would have predicted, right? That I doubt mode would have been like cash struggling, like they could have become profitable if they wanted to with the number of customers they had, right? But there are a number of companies that were founded probably from 2019 to 2021 where people were just like pitching on a PowerPoint or if that, and they've raised millions of dollars, and they have either a very, very small product surface area, or they've they just haven't progressed far enough in terms of like go to market or even product. And I do see that some of them will have to like either join up or be acquired or do something else. And because what we're seeing is with the interest rates, the funding market the funding market has dried up a bit. Like there's obviously like the AI space which we're in, which it's still buoyant, but a lot of the other space, a lot of the rest of the space that MDS founders have worked in they're not seeing the same number of rounds closing that we've seen in the past. So there'll have to be some kind of adjustment. I don't wish this like on, there's so many great founders out there who are trying to do something great, but it's just inevitable. And if you've ever read like Namdi Regulum's Substack, Namdi's like a partner at Lightspeed Ventures. He makes like really good like economic blog posts about what's going on in VC funding. I really recommend it.
Yeah, I would just kind of echo a few of the things that both Taylor and David have said, and I think just the conditions that we're in, it's like it kind of just leads to like a bit of a shrinking of the industry, whether that's for fewer companies being started or some companies having to consolidate or close. So yeah, definitely. It depends on which conference you go to, about which company thinks they're at the center of the modern data stack. So
Sure.
like at Snowflake's the center of the modern data stack. But it is interesting to see some things like, Hex functioning inside of Snowflake. So there's things happening where you're already starting to see some of these tools working together in ways that they didn't before, which I think is pretty interesting. And we're probably going to continue to see a lot of that. Another piece that I think I'm pretty passionate about is kind of turning the measurement on ourselves as data people. It's like we've spent all this time building all these things, but we don't necessarily take the data, the metadata about our own, the tech stack that we've built, or, how do we measure the impact that we're having at the company, and having that be something that we're actually, really focused on. There are some data teams out there doing that, but you really don't see as many as should be, given our experience in the area. We should be thinking about that first, like, what are our KPIs? How do we measure ourselves and our success in a more rigorous way? So maybe seeing more companies focusing on that might be the next phase that we go into. But yeah.
Yeah, we it's funny, Eric and I long ago tried to, when we were at a consulting firm that focused primarily on Cognos customers, like in 2016, we tried to build a tool that did that for BI teams, that like combined their audit information with kind of like some of our consulting expertise about what we knew was important for adoption and delivering value. And that, we hired a little dev team to build out the tool, and didn't really go anywhere. I think that it was part of like the culture at the time too, was like we were out there preaching this real focus on delivering business value, and even talking about like product thinking and analytics and that sort of thing. And it was just like the combination of the zeitgeist, and also, the Cognos, the people who deployed Cognos were these really huge enterprises, and the BI teams there were just focused on answering tickets, right? Like that was really what it was about. It was just like, we have this ticket backlog. We got to get through the ticket backlog, and we already know how to measure value. It's based on the number of tickets that we closed. And so I'm really, it's just an area that like, I agree 100%, Lindsay, that it's teams need to be thinking about that and finding ways to measure their value, and in terms of its impact on the community who consumes the analytics, as opposed to how many pipelines did we build, or how many reports exist, or even how many users are accessing those reports. Those are all important things, but that's not the real that's not the real proof point.
The leading measures in a way, but it's more about like, how do you actually focus on a strategy, and then how do you execute on that strategy, and then how do you measure whether or not you've delivered on that in a way that has positive ROI, hopefully.
Yeah. And it's funny too, you mentioned Hex running in Snowflake. Like one of the things I've thought about the modern data stack is that, like, I've spent a lot of time working with very large enterprises, especially when it was consulting, and they, like, the biggest impediment to them embracing this way of working is actually the procurement team, in that they can't buy 17 point solutions. Like, it'll take 17 years to get 17 point solutions to implement every piece you could want of the modern data stack. And so I think one of my predictions is that we'll see more things like, oh, you know what, my tool, like the tool runs in Snowflake, or what, you can acquire it through AWS using your existing AWS procurement contract, and we'll just slide the spend on whatever tool it happens to be into your monthly AWS spend, and that will be the road that they have to get into the enterprise. Because I can tell you, closing, it doesn't matter how tiny the deal is. A lot of enterprises, it will take literally infinity to get the software through procurement and security.
I spent 2 years at a big pharmaceutical company, so I feel the procurement challenge very, very deeply in my heart.
So we're just about out of time here. I think last question is just what advice do you have for someone who is kind of entering the data world at this moment in time, right? Like, let's say you're a young person and you want to become a data analyst or a data engineer, kind of given things where we are as an industry and the wave of AI that we see coming, just what advice would you have for that person? What things should they focus on to help, make them stand out as much as possible as a data practitioner? And Lindsay, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get this question a lot, actually, because I do a lot in the community, and there are a lot of people shifting into the industry still. I think the biggest advice that I give people is find the community, like get involved in the communities that are around, like DBT Slack, Locally Optimistic, many other ones that are out there. It took me a long time to find the pulse on the community, and I think obviously it kind of had to grow, but I spent a long time in my career being the only data person at my company and every job that I had. And I always felt really alone, and building my skills and growing was kind of something I did on my own. And just, I think people need to know they're not alone. There's so many other people out there, and we all face the same challenges. So the closer you can get to the community, the faster you're going to grow. Join things like MDS Fest, and just get out there and learn from other people. And then I think the other big advice I would give is focus on your soft skills as much as your technical skills. There's a lot of weight put on technical skills. And I would argue that those are sometimes easier to learn depending on, your background and your affinities to skill sets. But the soft skills are harder to learn and they take longer. So don't forget to focus on those.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with those two. Those are kind of the first that came to mind. I think the one thing in particular that was the hardest lesson for me to learn in data was that you can complete the ticket to 100% accuracy and it can still be the wrong thing to do. So I think as soon as you can learn that, and that, the first request is not the thing you need to solve, then I think you're already in a really good spot, because you're able to have those tough discussions about, okay, well, what is the right thing to do? Because that's the most difficult thing about what we do, I think, the technical part. There's so many things out there to help with that. It's just, how do you make sure you're answering the right question? Community and getting out there and trying different things are up there as well.
Yeah, I always tell people your audience doesn't know what they want until you show them what they asked for, right? And then you can start to learn what it is they actually need, that's great advice. David, advice for people entering?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Lindsay and Taylor said about the soft skill part and the stakeholder and community part. So I'll leave those two alone, because they covered it. But I think actually thinking about technical skills, let's go into that part for new people joining. I think there could be a bit of a false idea that maybe you don't need them anymore because of things like AI coming out, and you could just like skip at it and just rely on AI for it. I just think that's wrong. I think you still need some fundamentals. Like, you don't have to become like the levels of technical that people have been saying in the past, like halfway to being a software engineer. No, but you do need to learn like the basics of things like SQL, the basics of things like Python still, that will help you along the way. Because even though you will become like empowered by AI tools in the future, whether that's inside your IDE or whatever, you still need to know that what it's doing is correct. And that's a fundamental thing that anyone coming into the industry needs to know. And I can't see them getting away from that anytime soon, if ever. And so you still need to pick those up.
Very good points.
Awesome. Well, we are at the we are at time here, so I want to thank the three of you for joining. This is an awesome conversation, and also, thank you and say congratulations on putting together MDS Fest. I'm really looking forward to it, and it sounds like there's going to be a lot of awesome presentations. So for those of you who are watching, mdsfest.com, it's August 21st through 25th. It sounds like there are going to be presentations like running all day and night, and so this is a big event that you'll be able to tune into and get a lot of great information about topics like the ones that we covered here today. In addition to some technical presentations on how to accomplish specific things in DBT or the modern data stack in general. So it's a free conference. Again, mdsfest.com. Check it out. We will be checking it out, and hope that you attend and that it's valuable for you. So again, Taylor, David, Lindsay, thank you for joining us. And and any final words, Eric, before we sign off?
No, I think you about covered it. If you're watching this right now, we are currently in Kenya. So once we get back, I'm sure we'll have lots of stories to share about Kenya. So should be some interesting shows once we get back. I am certain. Maybe
we'll just do a show with like pictures of giraffes and stuff. And
we could
not talk about data for a week.
We can name it Kenyalytics.
All right. Cool.
All right.
So, well, until next time, I am Ryan.
I am Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Take care, everybody.